There is a woman in this story who gave up everything. She gave up her youth. She gave up her own family. She gave up her dreams, her sleep, her comfort, and her time. She gave up 37 years of her life, not for money, not for fame, not for recognition, but for one little boy who had nobody left in this world. One little boy who lost his mother and his father on the same night, in the same accident, on a cold and rainy road in November. One little boy who screamed so loud in that hospital that the nurses said they could hear him 3 floors up. One little boy who had nobody to hold him, to feed him, to wipe his tears, to tell him it was going to be okay. Nobody except her. Her name is Mama Grace. And today, in a beautiful house in Lagos, in a house that she helped build with her prayers and her presence and her love, that same woman is on the floor, on her knees, on the cold marble floor of the kitchen, begging for a glass of water. Begging. A 71-year-old woman, on her knees, begging. And the person standing over her, the person watching her with her arms folded and a small cold smile on her face, is the woman who was hired to take care of her. The woman who was paid to make sure Mama Grace was comfortable. But comfort was not what Mama Grace was getting. And the boy she raised, the man she sacrificed everything for, the billionaire who owns 3 companies across 4 countries, and whose face has been on the cover of business magazines in Lagos and London and New York, he does not know. He does not know. Because he is in Tokyo right now, in a meeting, closing a deal worth $200 million. He does not know that the woman who sang him to sleep every night for 37 years is on the kitchen floor right now, begging for water. But he is about to find out. Because today something is going to happen that nobody planned, nobody scheduled, nobody arranged. Today, Adrien, billionaire CEO, founder of Akefer Holdings, is coming home. Unannounced. And what he is about to walk into is going to change everything. If you are the kind of person who believes that cruelty always gets paid back, and that love always finds its way home, then stay right here. Because this story is going to break your heart before it heals it. And when it heals it, it is going to heal it completely. This is the story of Mama Grace, the woman who raised a billionaire, and the day he finally came home. If you believe that every act of cruelty has a price, smash that like button right now. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Have you ever seen someone treat an elderly person badly? Tell us what happened. The rain started at 7 o'clock on the evening of November the 14th. It was not a gentle rain. It was not the kind of rain that taps politely on rooftops and asks permission to enter. It was the kind of rain that arrives like an argument, loud, angry, insistent, with no intention of stopping anytime soon. In the city of Enugu, in the southeastern part of Nigeria, the roads were flooding by 7:15. Cars were pulling off to the side. Drivers were switching on hazard lights. People were running under bus stop shelters, holding bags and newspapers over their heads, laughing nervously at the sky. But one car was not pulling over. One car was still moving. A silver Honda Accord, 2001 model, moving steadily down the Enugu-Onitsha expressway at a speed that was perhaps a little too fast for the rain. Inside that car were 2 people, a man and a woman. Emmanuel Akafor and his wife, Chinwe. Emmanuel was 41 years old. He was not a rich man, but he was a good one. He worked as a secondary school principal in Enugu. He was known in the neighborhood for his firm handshake, his loud laugh, and his ability to settle any argument between 2 people without either of them feeling like they had lost. Chinwe was 38. She taught mathematics at the same school where her husband was principal. She had a mind like a calculator and a heart like a wide-open door. People said that if you visited the Akafor house on any evening, you would find the kitchen hot, the compound full of neighborhood children, and Chinwe somewhere in the middle of it all, laughing with food on her hands. They were driving back from visiting Emmanuel's older sister in Onitsha. They had stayed longer than they planned. Chinwe's sister had insisted on cooking one more pot of soup. Emmanuel had told one more story, and by the time they finally said their goodbyes and got into the car, it was already past 6:30 and the clouds had been looking dangerous for an hour. Their son was home. He was 7 years old. His name was Adrien. Adrien Chukwumeka Akafor. He was at home with their nanny, a woman named Grace Ez, who had been with the family since Adrien was 3 months old. Mama Grace, as everyone called her, was 34 at the time. She had come from IMO State, from a small village called Unannounced, looking for work in the city. A friend of Chinwe's had recommended her. She had been with them ever since. 4 years of early mornings and late nights, 4 years of warming bottles and wiping noses, 4 years of being the constant background music of Adrien's childhood. That night, Mama Grace and Adrien were sitting on the living room floor playing a game with bottle caps. Adrien had arranged them in a line and was pretending they were soldiers. Mama Grace was pretending to be the enemy army and losing dramatically every time Adrien moved his soldiers forward, which made him shriek with laughter. At 8:45, the phone rang. Mama Grace got up from the floor, said, "Don't move your soldiers while I am gone," and picked up the landline receiver. She listened for 45 seconds. When she came back to the living room, her face had changed. It had changed completely. She sat back down on the floor next to Adrien, but she did not pretend to be the enemy army anymore. She put her arms around the boy and held him very tightly, and she pressed her face into his hair. "Mama Grace," Adrien said, his voice small and confused, "is it your turn to attack?" She held him tighter. "Mama Grace, you're squeezing too much." She did not respond. "Mama Grace, are you crying?" And she was. She was crying silently with her face in his hair, holding him with both arms because she already understood, even before any adult had come to explain it to him, even before the hospital, even before the police report, even before any of it, that this child's world had just broken in half. And she was the only thing standing between him and the full weight of that breaking. Emmanuel and Chinwe Akafor had been in a collision on the Enugu-Onitsha Expressway. A lorry had hydroplaned on the flooded road and crossed into their lane. The impact was head-on. Emmanuel died at the scene. Chinwe was brought to the hospital but did not survive the surgery. They were both gone. And Adrien was 7 years old, sitting on a living room floor with bottle-cap soldiers. And the only person between him and the end of the world was a 34-year-old woman from Umanachi named Grace Ez. She held him all night. She did not sleep. She sat with him in the living room with the lights on and held him even after he fell asleep against her shoulder, and she held him while she cried silently into the dark and made a decision. The decision was not complicated. It did not involve long deliberation or consultation or even prayer, though she prayed too. The decision was simple, and it was made without fanfare, the way the most important decisions usually are. She was not going to leave this child. She was going to stay. Emmanuel's relatives came the next day. They were kind people, genuinely grieving, genuinely shocked. There was talk of what would happen to Adrien. Emmanuel's elder brother, Uncle Emeka, offered to take him. Emmanuel's mother, a sharp-eyed woman from the village named Mama Nkechi, said the boy should come to the village with her. But Adrien would not let go of Mama Grace. He sat in the corner of the room where the adults were talking, and he held Mama Grace's hand with both of his, and he would not release it. Every time someone suggested he go somewhere, he gripped tighter. He did not cry. He did not say a word. He just held her hand and looked at the floor with a face that was too still for a 7-year-old. It was Mama Nkechi herself who finally said, "Let Grace stay with the boy." She said it quietly and with authority, and the room went silent, and that was the end of the discussion. Mama Grace stayed. The house was paid up for 2 more years. Emmanuel had been careful with money, and there was some savings. The school paid out a provident fund. Emmanuel's brother and his mother sent money regularly, more than enough to run the house and keep Adrien in school. And Mama Grace, who could have found another family, a paying job, a life of her own, chose to stay in that house in Enugu and raise a 7-year-old boy who was not her son but who she loved as if he were. She cooked his meals. She took him to school. She helped him with his homework even when she did not understand the questions and had to sit with the textbook herself and figure it out. She went to parent-teacher meetings. She attended school prize-giving days. She sat in the front row at the primary school drama competition when Adrien played the role of a talking tree, and she clapped so hard her palms went red. She was not his mother. She never tried to replace his mother. She kept photographs of Emmanuel and Chinwe on the wall of the living room, and she spoke about them to Adrien regularly and warmly, keeping them alive in his memory the way only someone who truly loved him could. She told him about his father's loud laugh. She told him about his mother's cooking. She told him about the way Emmanuel used to read the newspaper out loud to Chinwe every morning, because Chinwe hated wearing her reading glasses. She gave him both things. She gave him the memory of who he had lost and the warmth of what he still had. And he grew. Adrien Okafor grew up with 2 things that most children do not have together: discipline and hunger. Not hunger for food. Mama Grace made sure he was never hungry for food. She could make 1 cup of rice feed 3 people and make all 3 of them feel full. She stretched a budget the way a tailor stretches fabric, with skill and creativity and 0 waste. No, the hunger Adrien had was a different kind. It was the kind of hunger that lives behind the eyes of a child who has lost everything and decided, somewhere in the deep, quiet part of himself, that he is going to build it back. He was 8 when he started reading his father's old economics textbooks, not because anyone told him to, not because there was a school assignment. He found them in a box in his father's old study, and he sat on the floor, and he opened one, and he started reading, and he did not stop until Mama Grace came and told him dinner was ready. He was 9 when he started calculating things. He calculated how much it cost to run the house per month. He calculated how many mangoes Mama Grace bought from the market per week, and what they cost, and what they would cost if you bought them in bulk from a farmer instead. He wrote it all down in a notebook with a pencil that had been sharpened so many times it was barely 2 inches long. "Mama Grace," he said one evening, looking up from his notebook, "if you buy the mangoes directly from the man who grows them, we save 300 naira per week." Mama Grace looked at him. He was 9 years old with a tiny pencil and a serious face. "Is that so?" she said. "Yes, I calculated it." "And how do we find the man who grows them?" "I already asked at the market. His name is Musa. He is in Abakba. He comes to town every Saturday." Mama Grace found the mango farmer. She bought directly. They saved 300 naira a week. Adrien wrote it down in his notebook like a victory. He was 12 when he started his first business. He organized a note-selling service for his secondary school classmates. He would sit through class, take the best, most detailed notes possible, and then sell copies for 50 naira per page. It sounds small, but at 15, when he had been running it for 3 years, he had saved enough money to buy himself a second-hand laptop. He was the only boy in his neighborhood with a laptop. He was 17 when he started teaching himself programming from YouTube videos on that laptop, and from free online courses, and from 3 library books he had read so many times the spines had cracked. He was 19 when he got the scholarship. It was a federal scholarship for science and technology students, highly competitive, covering tuition, accommodation, feeding allowance, and a monthly stipend at the University of Lagos. Adrien applied without telling Mama Grace. He did not want to build her hope and then disappoint her. He prepared his application alone, typed it on his laptop, got one of his former teachers to write him a reference, submitted it, and waited. When the letter came, he read it standing at the gate where the postman had handed it to him. He read it twice. Then he walked inside, found Mama Grace in the kitchen making egusi soup, and he held the letter out to her without saying a word. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and took the letter and read it. She read it once, twice, 3 times. Then she sat down on the kitchen stool because her legs had stopped working properly. "Adrien," she said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I got it," he said. She covered her face with both hands. She stayed like that for a moment. And then she got up and held him, this 19-year-old boy who was already taller than she was, and she held him the way she had held him on the night his parents died, with everything she had, with both arms, with her whole body. "Your father," she said into his shoulder, "would be so proud, your mother too. They are watching, Adrien, I promise you they are watching." He went to University of Lagos. He studied computer engineering. He was not the most naturally brilliant student in his year. There were others who found things easier, who could glance at a problem and solve it while he was still reading the question. But none of them worked harder. None of them stayed in the library until it closed. None of them woke at 4 in the morning to study before lectures. None of them carried the memory of a rainy night on the Induguanacha Expressway in their chest like a fuel that never ran out. He graduated with a first-class degree. He was 23 years old. And then things began to move very fast. He spent 1 year working at a technology company in Lagos, learning how businesses operated from the inside, watching everything, asking questions nobody else thought to ask, taking notes the way he had taken notes since he was 12 years old. Then he left and started his own company with 400,000 naira, money he had saved from his salary and his stipend, and from a side business he had been running since his 2nd year of university, building simple websites for small businesses. The company was called Akafor Tech Solutions. It was not glamorous. It started in a 2-room apartment in Surulere. The office was one of the rooms. The other room was where Adrien slept, on a foam mattress on the floor, next to his laptop, next to his notebooks, next to a photograph of his parents that Mama Grace had given him when he left for university. 3 years later, Akafor Tech Solutions had 22 employees and had built the software backbone for 11 different companies across Lagos and Abuja. 5 years later, it had become Akafor Holdings, a technology and business solutions company with divisions in software development, logistics technology, and digital infrastructure. They had offices in Lagos, Abuja, Accra, and London. They had 260 staff members. 7 years after that tiny apartment in Surulere, Adrien Chukwumeka Akafor was 30 years old, and Forbes Africa had included his name on a list of the most influential young business leaders on the continent. He was 33 when the second Forbes article came. This one had a photo. He was standing in front of the Lagos office of Akafor Holdings in a navy blue suit, with the kind of expression that said nothing was surprising him anymore. The headline read, "Adrien Akafor, Akafor Holdings CEO, crosses the billion-dollar mark." He called Mama Grace the day the article came out. She was in Enugu still, in the old house, which he had renovated twice over and staffed properly. "Mama Grace," he said when she picked up the phone. "Adrien," she said. She always said his name like it was a full sentence. "Did you see the article? Your uncle Emeka called me this morning and read it out to me 3 times. He laughed. Are you proud?" There was a pause on the line, a warm, full pause. "Adrien," she said, "I was proud when you were 9 years old and you found the mango farmer. Everything after that has just been the same pride, getting louder." He was quiet for a moment. "I am going to build you a proper house, Mama Grace, a real one, in Lagos near me, so I can see you whenever I want." "I don't need a palace," she said. "I know, but you are getting one anyway." And he did. He bought a property in a quiet, secure estate in Lekki, Lagos. He renovated it completely. 3 bedrooms, a garden, a full kitchen with every appliance she would ever need, a sitting room with furniture she chose herself from a catalog he sent to her. He hired a cook named Patience and a driver named Bello. He hired a housekeeper. And then, because he wanted Mama Grace to have someone close by who would look after her personally and make sure she was comfortable, he advertised for a live-in personal caregiver. A woman named Sandra Ez applied. She had excellent references. She spoke well in the interview. She had a calm face and answered every question perfectly. She said she had cared for elderly relatives before. She said she believed in treating older people with dignity and respect. She said it with her hand over her chest and a look of sincerity that would have convinced anyone. She convinced Adrien. She arrived at Mama Grace's house on a Monday morning with 2 suitcases and a warm smile. And everything from that Monday morning began to go wrong. Sandra Ez was 36 years old. She was originally from Delta State, though she had lived in Lagos for the past 11 years. She was not an unintelligent woman. In fact, the problem with Sandra was precisely that she was intelligent enough to calculate things, to plan things, to understand how situations worked and what she could extract from them. She had not always been this way. There were people from her childhood who remembered a different Sandra, a girl who was sharp but not cold, ambitious but not ruthless. But 11 years of Lagos had a way of changing people who arrived without enough armor. She had worked as a domestic staff member in 3 different wealthy households before this one. In the first, she had been let go after 6 months when the madam of the house had noticed that certain items, small things, a necklace here, a bottle of perfume there, kept disappearing. Nothing was ever proven. Sandra denied everything calmly and left with her full month's pay. In the second house, she had lasted a year before a conflict with the family driver led to her eventual departure. Again, no formal accusation, no legal consequence. She simply moved on. In the third house, she had stayed for 2 years. And in those 2 years, she had learned something important. She had learned that in wealthy households where the main person, the owner, the one who paid the salary, was frequently absent, enormous power settled on whoever was present. If you were present and you understood how to use that power, you could shape the reality of everyone around you. You could control what people ate, what they knew, who they spoke to, how they felt. She had tested this in the third house on a housekeeper named Ngozi who was older and slower, and who the family trusted completely. She had discovered that if you isolated someone, controlled their information, controlled their food, controlled their comfort, you could reduce them. You could make a person smaller, quieter, more uncertain. And once a person was small and uncertain, they were easy to manage. She arrived at Mama Grace's house in Lekki and she assessed everything quickly. The house was beautiful, the fittings were expensive, the kitchen was stocked, the garden was maintained, the security at the gate was professional. The driver, Bello, was loyal to Adrien and not the type to gossip or share information. The cook, Patience, was a quiet woman in her 40s who kept to herself and did her work well. And Mama Grace herself was 71 years old, had mild arthritis in her knees and her hands, could not move very fast, was dependent on the household for her daily needs, and her closest person in the world was in Tokyo. Sandra looked at all of this, and she made a calculation. She understood one more thing as well. She understood that Mama Grace's name was on a document. She had seen it referenced indirectly, a comment Bello, the driver, had made, something Patience had said while preparing food, that when the billionaire built this house, he had registered it. And the property registration, from what Sandra had been able to piece together in her first 2 weeks, had Mama Grace's name somewhere in it. Not the ownership, but something. Some kind of provision that Adrien had made, quietly, legally, to protect his nanny. Sandra did not know exactly what it said. She had not seen it, but she intended to find it. And she intended that whatever was in it, she would find a way to redirect its benefit, if not entirely, then substantially, toward herself. This was her plan. It was a long plan, a patient plan, a plan that required her to maintain two completely different sets of behavior depending on who was watching. When Adrien called, which he did every 3 or 4 days, sometimes more frequently, Sandra was attentive, warm, detailed. She would give him full reports. "Mama Grace ate well today, sir. She had her medication on time. We sat in the garden this afternoon and she told me about your childhood. She is such a wonderful woman, sir." She was so convincing that Adrien, on the other end of the phone in Tokyo or London or Accra, would feel genuine relief. He would hang up the phone feeling like Mama Grace was being taken care of, feeling like he had made the right choice, feeling like he could focus on his work because everything was fine at home. But when the call ended and the phone went back into Adrien's pocket, everything changed. The warmth left Sandra's face. The attentiveness became a mask stored away until the next call, and what remained was something colder and more purposeful. It started, as cruelty usually does, with very small things. The kind of small things that feel like they could be mistakes. The kind of things you can dismiss individually, but that form a very clear pattern if you look at them together. On the 3rd week of Sandra's employment, she forgot to bring Mama Grace her evening glass of warm water. Mama Grace said nothing. She thought it was an oversight. On the 4th week, the portion of food on Mama Grace's plate at dinner began to shrink. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a little less rice, a little less stew, a smaller piece of fish. If you had looked at the plate in isolation, you might not have noticed. But if you had compared it to what Sandra served herself and what she allowed the cook to serve to the household, you would have noticed immediately. Mama Grace noticed. She said nothing. She was not the kind of woman who complained easily. She had spent 37 years putting other people's comfort before her own. She had spent a lifetime absorbing discomfort quietly. She told herself it was a misunderstanding. She told herself Sandra was young and perhaps did not realize. She told herself it would sort itself out. It did not sort itself out. By the 6th week, Mama Grace was being served her meals last always, after Sandra had eaten, and after Patience the cook had finished the kitchen work. By the 8th week, the meals themselves had become something deliberately unpleasant. Rice with no stew, bread with nothing on it, soup that was watery and unseasoned, as if the ingredients had been scooped out before the pot reached Mama Grace's end of the kitchen. By the 10th week, Sandra had established a clear set of unspoken rules in the house. Rules that nobody had agreed to and nobody challenged openly, because Sandra enforced them with a particular combination of false sweetness and barely veiled threat that made resistance feel too costly. Patience the cook went quiet and kept her eyes down. Bello the driver came to the house, did his driving duties, and left as quickly as he could. Neither of them confronted Sandra. Neither of them called Adrien. They were employees. They needed their jobs. And Sandra had a way of making it very clear, without ever saying it directly, what could happen to people who made problems for her. Mama Grace was the only one in that house with no salary to protect, but she had something else to protect. She had Adrien's peace. And so she stayed quiet because she believed, truly believed, that if she told Adrien what was happening, he would worry. He would be distracted. He would feel guilty for being away. He would perhaps even make decisions, big, life-altering decisions, that would cost him professionally because of her. And Mama Grace who had spent 37 years making sure Adrien Akafer had everything he needed to become who he became, was not going to be the reason he faltered now. And so she absorbed it. She absorbed the small plates and the cold food and the canceled garden afternoons, and the room that Sandra had decided was too warm, and had adjusted the air conditioning to be too cold, and the television remote that would regularly go missing, and the evening calls to her nephew in the village that Sandra interrupted with urgent and frequently invented household business. She absorbed all of it, the way a river absorbs rain, quietly and completely, with no visible protest. But rivers have limits. Even rivers, given enough rain, eventually flood. Mama Grace Ez had been born in 1953 in Unannounced, a quiet village in Imo State. She was the third of 7 children. Her father was a farmer and her mother was a seamstress, and together they had given their children not wealth but something that proved more durable: character. Mama Grace grew up knowing how to work. She could cook before she was 10. She could manage a household before she was 15. She had a quality that people in her village noticed and could not entirely name, a quality of stillness and warmth combined, as if she were simultaneously the quietest person in the room and the most present. People felt better when she was near. Difficult situations felt more manageable. Arguments settled faster. Children calmed down. It was not something she performed. It was simply what she was. She had wanted to be a teacher. She had been a bright student and she loved learning, loved the moment when something complicated became clear, loved watching that same clarity arrive in other people's eyes. But her family could not afford secondary school fees for all the children, and she was not the firstborn, and the money had to go in order of priority. She completed primary school, and that was where her formal education ended. She went to the city at 22 looking for work. She worked as a domestic staff member in Enugu in Owerri, before eventually arriving in Enugu and finding the Akafor household. She had never married. There had been a man once in her late 20s, a pleasant, steady man named Chukwuma, who had asked her to marry him. She had liked him genuinely. But he had come at the same time as Adrien came into her life, and she had made her choice, and she had not regretted it. Her choice was Adrien. Her choice was this child who needed her. In the 37 years since that rainy November night, she had never once asked Adrien for anything. Not money, not gifts, not recognition. She asked for nothing except the occasional phone call when his schedule was brutal and the calls became rare. She lived simply. She had simple tastes. She found pleasure in her garden, in her Bible, in a good television drama, in the sound of rain, though that particular sound had a complicated relationship with her memory, and in the rare but precious visits from Adrien himself, when he would arrive and fill the house with his energy and his noise and sit across from her at the kitchen table and eat whatever she had cooked and say, without fail, every single time, "Mama Grace, nobody on earth cooks like this." That was her reward. That was her whole reward. And it was, in her accounting of the universe, more than sufficient. But now, in the house in Lekki, she was being diminished. She felt it happening. She could feel herself becoming smaller. Not physically, she was still the same height, still the same solid, upright woman. But internally she could feel something shrinking. The long meals alone in her room, the shrinking plates, the cold air, the remote control that was never there. The garden afternoons that Sandra canceled for reasons that never quite made sense. The phone interruptions. The constant, low-grade awareness that she was being managed, controlled, kept in a small, invisible box that got a little smaller every week. She began to sleep more. This was new. She had never been a heavy sleeper. She had spent decades as the first one awake in whatever house she occupied, up before dawn, starting the day, getting things moving. Now she found herself sleeping past 8, past 9. Not from laziness, she had no laziness in her body, but from a kind of exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical activity. The exhaustion of being erased slowly by degrees, by a woman who smiled at the right moments and answered the phone beautifully and was building, brick by invisible brick, a prison made of small daily cruelties. She stopped tending her garden. This was the thing that broke Patience the cook's heart when she noticed it. The cook would arrive in the morning and look through the kitchen window at the garden and see it sitting untended, the plants slightly drooping, and she would feel something twist inside her because she knew that Mama Grace's garden was the last territory that was entirely her own. And now even that was being abandoned. She stopped watching her evening drama. Sandra had developed a habit of sitting in the main sitting room with the television loud and loud friends visiting until late, which meant that Mama Grace, whose room was adjacent to the sitting room, lay in her cold room listening to noise, she did not want and could not escape from. She ate less, not by choice. The food she was receiving was neither sufficient nor appetizing enough to encourage appetite, but she had also lost a little of her will to push back, to insist, to say, "This is not enough." The insisting required energy. The energy was being drained by the constant low-level assault on her dignity. She prayed more. This, at least, Sandra could not take from her. Every evening before the room got too cold and the noise from the sitting room got too loud, Mama Grace would take out her Bible and read, her reading glasses slightly foggy, her arthritic fingers turning pages carefully, and she would pray. She prayed for Adrien. She prayed for his business. She prayed for the souls of Emmanuel and Chinwe. She prayed for Patience, who was kind but frightened. She prayed for Bello, who she sensed was struggling with what he witnessed but felt powerless to change. She even prayed for Sandra, a short prayer, a careful prayer, the kind you offer for someone when you do not know what else to give them. And sometimes, when the sitting room finally went quiet and the cold air had settled into her bones and sleep was being stubborn about coming, she would look at the wall where she had placed one framed photograph, Adrien at his graduation, gown and cap, holding his scroll, grinning with his whole face, and she would speak to him quietly, the way she had spoken to him when he was 7 and sleeping against her shoulder. "You did well, my son," she would say in the dark. "You did very well, I am proud of you." She would not have told him what was happening for anything in the world. She was wrong to keep quiet. She would come to understand that later, but her reasons were so deeply rooted in love that it is impossible to call them a mistake without understanding first what that love cost her. The weeks passed, the diminishment continued, Sandra grew bolder. The boldness came gradually. Each small act of cruelty that went unchallenged gave Sandra confidence to attempt the next, slightly larger one. She had learned this pattern in the third house. She had tested it. It worked. The target had to genuinely, deeply believe that resistance was futile, that no one was coming, that the situation was permanent and unchallengeable. And Mama Grace, who had stopped calling Adrien except when he called her, who had stopped mentioning discomfort to Patience, who had stopped pushing back on anything, Mama Grace was beginning to exhibit precisely the signs that Sandra was looking for. She was beginning to look defeated. And Sandra, who had been patient, who had been waiting for exactly this, decided it was time to move to the next phase of her plan. She had found the document 3 weeks earlier. She had found it in a file at the bottom of the drawer in Mama Grace's room, in a brown envelope that had Adrien Acaffer Holdings printed on the upper left corner. She had waited for a day when Mama Grace was in the garden and Patience was at the market and Bello was on a driving errand for Adrien's office in Lagos. She had gone into the room, opened the drawer, found the envelope, and read the document inside very carefully. It was a legal document. It was titled Property Trust Provision, and it was signed by Adrien Acaffer and a firm of solicitors, and it contained a clause, clearly worded, legally binding, that stated that the property at number 14 Serenity Close, Lekki Phase 2, Lagos, was held in permanent trust for the use and comfort of Grace for the duration of her natural life, and that upon her death the property would transfer to a charitable foundation in the names of Emmanuel and Chinwe Acaffer. There was also a separate subclause, worded carefully, the way lawyers word things when they are genuinely trying to protect someone, that said any person employed to assist Grace who was found to have caused her harm, discomfort, or financial disadvantage, could be removed by the trustee of the document, who was Adrien Acaffer himself, and could be subject to civil or criminal action at his discretion. Sandra had read this clause several times. She was not deterred by it. She had lived long enough in wealthy households to know that clauses like this were only as powerful as the person enforcing them, and the person enforcing it was in Tokyo. But she also understood for the first time clearly that Mama Grace herself had no ownership of the property. The provision was for her use, not her ownership. The house would go to a foundation, not to any relative or person Mama Grace might want to leave it to. Which meant that what Sandra had hoped, that she might persuade Mama Grace to transfer something to her, was not available in the form she had imagined. She needed a different angle. She spent 2 weeks thinking. She looked at everything. She looked at the monthly household budget that Adrien transferred, a generous amount that more than covered food, utilities, staff salaries, and Mama Grace's medication and comfort. She looked at how that budget flowed. She saw that it flowed through an account that Sandra, as household manager, had been given limited access to for operational payments. She began making small adjustments, small overstatements of costs, small amounts redirected. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would show up immediately in a casual review. She also began making a different kind of plan, a longer, more patient plan that involved making Mama Grace as dependent as possible, physically, emotionally, practically. A plan that involved ensuring that when the time came, the old woman would be too broken, too isolated, too uncertain to challenge anything. That was the plan. The plan that was running smoothly on the morning that will live in Sandra's memory for the rest of her life. The morning that the water ran out. It was a Tuesday. The month was March. The Lagos heat had settled into one of those thick, dry spells that made the air itself feel tired and heavy, as if the city were breathing through cloth. By 9 in the morning, the temperature inside the house, Sandra had again adjusted the thermostat, this time in the opposite direction, because the heat gave her an excuse to keep the doors and windows she preferred closed, was uncomfortable, stale, the kind of air that sits in your chest slightly wrong. Mama Grace had woken at 6:30. She had said her morning prayers. She had reached for the glass of water that was supposed to be on her bedside table, the glass that patients left there every night before going home, part of a system that had been established in the household's early days. But the glass was not there. Sandra had decided 2 days ago that Mama Grace did not need water on the bedside table because it attracted mosquitoes. The reasoning was absurd. The room had a mosquito net. The glass was covered with a small plate. But Sandra had said it with such confident authority that nobody had challenged it. So Mama Grace woke at 6:30 with no water. She said her prayers anyway. She washed her face. She put on her house clothes, and she went to find Patience in the kitchen to ask for some water. But Patience was not in the kitchen. Patience had been told by Sandra the evening before that she should not come until 10 o'clock the next day. "I will manage the morning," Sandra had said. "You deserve a later start." It sounded considerate. It was strategic. The kitchen was empty. The kettle was cold. The refrigerator was there. It was always stocked, but the chilled water bottles had been removed and replaced with soft drinks that Sandra preferred. Mama Grace did not drink soft drinks. She did not like the sugar, and the fizz disturbed her stomach. She looked in the cabinets for a glass. 3 of the 4 cabinet doors were locked. Sandra had started locking cabinets. The ones that held the good plates, the expensive glasses, the items that Sandra considered beyond Mama Grace's everyday use, about 3 weeks earlier. The 4th cabinet had plastic cups. Mama Grace reached for one, meaning to fill it from the tap, which was perfectly clean and filtered. "What are you doing?" Sandra's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She was in a silk robe, hair tied, coffee in her hand, and her eyes had that particular sharpness that Mama Grace had learned to read over the months, the sharpness that meant she had found something to take issue with. "I was going to get some water," Mama Grace said. Her voice was quiet. She had become quieter over the months, the way all people become quieter when they have been taught that speaking costs too much. "The tap water is for cooking," Sandra said. "You know that." "I just need a glass of—" "The tap water is for cooking," Sandra repeated, more firmly this time. The repetition was deliberate. It was a technique. Repetition, delivered with enough authority, created reality. If you said a thing confidently enough times, people stopped questioning whether it was true. Sandra, Mama Grace said, I am thirsty, I just need. Mama Grace, Sandra said, her voice shifting into the tone she used, the sympathetic, patronizing, managing tone. I am looking after this house. I have my systems. The chilled water is in the secondary fridge. The secondary fridge is locked because I need to manage the household budget and I cannot have everyone going in whenever they feel like it. When Patience comes at 10, she will get you some water. Mama Grace stared at her. A 71-year-old woman who had managed households, who had raised a billionaire, who had lived through grief and loss and work that would have felled most people, standing in a kitchen that had been bought for her, in a house that existed because of her, being told she needed to wait until 10 o'clock to have a glass of water. Sandra, she said. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something different in it, something that had not been there in weeks, a remnant, perhaps, of who she was before the shrinking. I am 71 years old. I have arthritis. I take medication in the morning. I need water with my medication. Please give me a glass of water. Sandra looked at her for a long, flat moment. Then she turned and walked toward the secondary fridge, which was a full-sized refrigerator in the utility room adjoining the kitchen, and made a show of finding her key on her keychain and unlocking it with theatrical slowness. She reached in. She looked inside. She straightened up. There is no more water in here, she said. The delivery is coming tomorrow. This was a lie. Patience had placed 6 bottles in that refrigerator the previous evening. Mama Grace did not know this. Sandra did. Then give me a glass from the tap, Mama Grace said. I told you, the tap water is for Sandra, and now Mama Grace's voice had something in it that had been absent for months, something that, if Sandra had been paying more careful attention, she might have recognized as a warning. I need water, please. Sandra looked at her with that small, cold smile that she deployed when she wanted to demonstrate her absolute certainty that nothing Mama Grace did or said was going to change the situation. Mama Grace, she said, setting down her coffee cup, you need to understand that this house runs in a certain way. I am responsible for this house. Adrien gave me that responsibility. When Patience comes, she will. Adrien gave you responsibility to care for me, Mama Grace said. Her voice was still quiet, but she was looking directly at Sandra now. Not responsibility to refuse me water. Sandra's smile did not change, but something behind her eyes tightened. I am not refusing you water, she said. I am managing the household resources correctly. There is a difference. And there it was, the complete, comfortable, absolute confidence. The confidence of a person who had watched their target shrink for months and had concluded that the shrinking was permanent. The confidence of a person who genuinely believed that there was no consequence coming because the only person who could bring a consequence was half the world away in a time zone that made quick intervention impossible. Mama Grace stood there for a moment longer. She looked at Sandra. She looked at the cabinet. She looked at the kitchen in her house, and she felt the full weight of everything that had been happening to her, not with anger exactly, with something deeper and more still than anger, with a sorrow that was also a clarity. She could feel her knees. The arthritis was always worse in the morning and the heat was making it worse today. She could feel her heart, which had been beating steadily for 71 years through everything that had been thrown at it. She turned and began walking back to her room. And then she stopped. Because her knees, the knees that had carried her for 7 decades, the knees that had held her upright through grief and work and sacrifice, chose that moment to give way. It was not a fall, not exactly. It was more like a slow, involuntary descent. Her knees buckled and she caught the edge of the kitchen counter, and she slid down to the floor, sitting awkwardly on the cold marble tiles, one hand on the counter, her face tight with the pain of the movement. Mama Grace. Sandra's voice was flat, not alarmed, not rushing forward to help, flat, assessing. I'm fine, Mama Grace said, though she was not entirely fine. Her knees were burning. The floor was cold. Getting up without help was going to be difficult. "Can you get up?" Sandra asked from across the kitchen. She had not moved. "Give me a moment." Sandra did not give her a moment in the sense of coming to offer a hand. She watched. She stood with her coffee and she watched Mama Grace on the kitchen floor, and she waited to see what the old woman would do. And what happened next was the thing that Mama Grace would spend the rest of her life feeling most complicated about. The thing that, when she tried to explain it to Adrien later, she struggled to find the right words for. The thing that was not weakness, it was never weakness, but was the final, visible cost of everything that Sandra had been systematically taking from her for months. She asked. "Sandra," she said on the floor, her hand on the counter, her knees burning, the heat thick around her. "Please, can I have some water?" Sandra tilted her head. "You are on the floor," she said, in a tone that sounded almost like concern but had no concern in it at all. "Maybe you should stay there until Patience comes. She can help you up more safely." "Sandra, please. It's only an hour. Patience will be here at 10. I need water, my medication." "The medication can wait until 10. "Sandra," and Mama Grace looked up at the woman, this woman she had tried to be patient with, this woman she had tried to understand, this woman she had prayed for, and what she said next was not a question. It was not a protest. It was something that had been building for months and that finally found its way out of her in the only form she had left. "Please," she said very quietly, "please." Sandra looked down at her. The small, cold smile was still on her face. "I'll check if there's any water in the guest bathroom," she said. "Give me a few minutes." She walked out of the kitchen. She did not come back for 45 minutes. Mama Grace sat on the kitchen floor. The marble was cold under her. Her knees throbbed. The heat was pressing. She held onto the counter and she sat and she breathed and she prayed quietly, automatically, the way breathing is automatic, and she waited. She did not cry. She was not going to cry. But she sat on the floor of her kitchen, in her house, 71 years old, and she waited for a woman who had been hired to care for her to bring her a glass of water. What neither of them knew, what nobody in that house knew, was that a car had already turned off the main road onto Serenity Close, that a driver named Khaled was pulling up outside number 14, that the person in the back seat of that car had just landed at Murtala Muhammad International Airport 4 hours earlier than expected, on a flight from Tokyo that had departed 12 hours ahead of schedule because a business meeting had ended early, and the man on the plane had been awake for 31 hours and was thinking, in that particular way that you think when you are exhausted and far from home, about a woman who sang him to sleep when he was 7 years old. Adrien Akefer had come home. He had not planned to come home this week. The Tokyo trip was supposed to run for 10 days. 3 days of meetings with the Japanese investment group that was considering a partnership with Akefer Holdings' new logistics division, 2 days of site visits, 3 days of documentation review, and then the flight home. Standard procedure for a deal of this size. Nothing unusual. But on the morning of day 5, something had happened that changed the schedule. It was a small thing that became a large thing, the way small things sometimes do. He had been in his hotel room in Tokyo at 6 in the morning, which was 10 in the evening in Lagos, and he had called Mama Grace. Their calls at this point had a rhythm. She would say she was fine. She would ask about the work. He would tell her something interesting from wherever he was. She would respond with warmth. He would hang up feeling reassured. But on this call, something was slightly off. She said she was fine. She asked about the work. He told her about Tokyo, about the way the city organized itself, about a meal he had eaten at a restaurant near the hotel. She responded with warmth. All of this was normal. But her voice had something in it. Not something she had put there on purpose. Mama Grace was not a calculating woman. She would never engineer a voice to signal distress. That was not who she was. But there was a quality to her voice that Adrien could not name and could not shake. A tiredness that was different from the ordinary tiredness of a 71-year-old woman. A flatness beneath the warmth, like a fire that was still burning but had less wood than it used to. He hung up the call. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed. He looked at the window, which showed him a slice of Tokyo city lights in the pre-dawn dark. He called her back. She picked up immediately. "Adrien, did you forget something?" "No," he said. "Mama Grace, how are you really?" A pause, brief but there. "I'm fine, Adrien. You worry too much." "Are you eating well?" "Of course." "Is Sandra giving you any trouble?" "Sandra is managing the house." He noticed later that she had not answered the question. He had asked if Sandra was giving her trouble. She had said Sandra was managing the house. The answers were not the same thing. But at the time, in the moment, on 5 days of Tokyo meetings and not enough sleep, he had not caught it. "I'm going to try to wrap things up early," he said. "Maybe I can get home before the weekend." "You don't need to rush because of me," she said immediately. "Your business is important." "You are important," he said. "Go to sleep, I'll call tomorrow." He ended the call. He lay on the hotel bed. He stared at the ceiling of the Tokyo hotel room and listened to the muffled sound of the city, and he thought about a November night in 1989 when a 34-year-old woman had held a 7-year-old boy all through the dark and had not let go. At 7:30 that morning, he called his assistant. "Move the documentation review sessions to a video call," he said. "I want to be on the first available flight back to Lagos." "Sir, the Japanese partners were expecting." "Video call. They'll understand. Get me home." By noon, he was at the airport. By midnight Lagos time, he was on the plane. By 4 in the morning Lagos time, Tuesday morning, March, the plane was touching down at Murtala Muhammad. His personal driver, Khaled, was waiting. He did not go to his own apartment in Victoria Island. He gave Khaled the address of Mama Grace's house in Lekki. He did not call ahead. He wanted to see, not the arranged version, not the prepared version where Sandra had 48 hours notice to make everything look correct. He wanted to see the real version, the Tuesday morning version, the version that happened when nobody was watching. He would remember, for years afterward, the moment the car turned onto Serenity Close and he saw the house. It looked fine from the outside. The garden was a little untended, but otherwise the exterior was exactly as he had left it. The security guard at the gate recognized the car and opened immediately, nodding respectfully. He got out of the car. Khaled moved to take his bags. He held up a hand, "Leave the bags." He walked to the front door. The front door was unlocked. He pushed it open. The house was warm, too warm, he frowned. He had set the air conditioning at a reasonable temperature and the system was automatic. Someone had changed it. He noted this and moved through the entry hall toward the kitchen, which was where Mama Grace usually was in the mornings. She had always had a habit of starting her day in the kitchen, making tea, sitting at the kitchen table for her morning prayers. Even in the years when she had been too stiff to cook, she still came to the kitchen in the morning. He pushed open the kitchen door. He saw her. She was on the floor. His heart stopped, completely stopped, a full second where everything inside him went absolutely still. Mama Grace. He was across the kitchen in 4 steps. He was at her side before the word had finished leaving his mouth. He was on his knees beside her, his hands on her shoulders, her face was up. She had heard the door, she was looking at him, and her expression was not pain. Not quite. It was something more complicated. Surprise first. Then a flooding warmth. Then something that she tried immediately to hide but that he saw with 33 years of knowing her face. It was relief. The relief of someone who had been waiting for rescue and had begun to believe that rescue was not coming. "Adrien," she whispered. "Mama Grace, are you hurt? What happened? Did you fall?" "I didn't fall," she said quickly. My knees. I came down to get some water and my knees. Where is Sandra? His voice had changed. He was still looking at Mama Grace, still checking her, hands, arms, face, the way she was sitting, whether she was in real pain, but his voice had changed into something he rarely used. Something that ran all the way down and had no warmth in it at all. She went to find water, Mama Grace said. And she said it in a way that, even in the shock of his arrival, even in the warmth of seeing him, she could not quite fully erase the bitterness underneath. To find water, he said it slowly. He looked at the kitchen, at the refrigerator, at the counter, at the locked cabinets. He stood up. He opened the unlocked cabinet. He saw the plastic cups. He went to the tap, filled one, came back and crouched beside Mama Grace and held it out. She took it with both hands slightly shaking. She drank. He watched her drink, and something was happening in his chest that was too large for his chest, and he was keeping it very carefully contained, because she was still on the floor and she needed help getting up, and his losing control was not going to help that. He put his arm around her carefully. Can you stand? Yes, slowly. He helped her up. Slowly, carefully, his arm steady around her, bearing most of her weight. He got her to the kitchen table. He pulled out a chair. She sat. He pulled out the chair beside her and sat. He looked at her, really looked at her. He had last seen her 3 months ago when he had visited briefly before the Tokyo trip. He was looking at 3 months of Sandra's work. He was seeing the results of 3 months of shrinking. She was thinner. He could see it in her face and her wrists and the way her housecoat sat on her shoulders. Her eyes, which had always been the brightest, most energetic part of her, even when everything else was tired, were still warm, but they were also carrying something. A heaviness. The particular heaviness of someone who has been surviving rather than living. Mama Grace, he said, very quietly. She looked at him. She was already trying to arrange her face into the reassuring version, already preparing to say she was fine. Tell me, he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. Tell me everything, he said. From the beginning, I am not going anywhere. And she looked at him. This man she had raised. This man who was sitting in her kitchen at 7:30 in the morning, still in his travel clothes from a Tokyo flight, who had sat down next to her and was looking at her with his father's eyes and his mother's patience. And the armor that she had maintained for months, the careful, protective silence, broke. She told him. It took 45 minutes. She told it slowly and in order, the way methodical people tell things. She started from Sandra's first week. The forgotten water at night, the shrinking plates, the locked cabinets, the adjusted thermostat, the canceled garden afternoons, the interrupted phone calls, the morning routine, the meals. She told it all quietly, without drama, without exaggeration, which somehow made it worse. The absence of drama made it more real. She was not telling him a story. She was reading him a record. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. He sat beside her at the kitchen table in the warm kitchen of her house in Lekki, and he listened to 37 years of love being repaid with cold kitchens and locked refrigerators and a 71-year-old woman begging on the floor for a glass of water. When she finished, the kitchen was very quiet. Adrien Okafor sat very still. Then he asked one question. Where is she? Sandra came down the stairs at 8:15, having spent the better part of 45 minutes in her room. She had not gone to look for water in the guest bathroom. She had gone back to bed, wearing a fresh outfit, her hair done, her makeup applied, the morning version of the performance fully assembled. She came into the kitchen and stopped. Adrien was standing by the kitchen counter. He was facing the door. He was still in his travel clothes, dark trousers, a white shirt slightly rumpled from the journey, no tie. He had a stillness that Sandra immediately registered as wrong. Wrong in the way that a very calm sea before a storm is wrong. The stillness of something that is absolutely not still. Mama Grace was at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a plate of fruit that Adrien had cut himself from the refrigerator. the large refrigerator, which had been fully stocked all along, and she was eating quietly and not looking at Sandra. "Sir," Sandra said, the performance was already running, the warm surprise, the delighted smile. "Adrien, I didn't know you were. Welcome back. I didn't receive any." "Close the door," Adrien said. His voice was quiet, completely flat, the kind of flat that is the opposite of calm. It is calm's dark mirror. The kind of flat that comes from a person who has made a decision and is now simply implementing it. Sandra closed the door. She looked at him. She was good at reading rooms. She was reading this one very fast, and she did not like what she was reading. "Sir," she began, "is everything?" "How long has she been on that floor?" Adrien said. Sandra blinked. She came down this morning on her knees. I was going to help her. I was just." "How long?" Not a question, a space left for an answer, a space that had the texture of a courtroom. "Not long," Sandra said. 15, 20 minutes. I was getting water for her from the—" "Sandra," he looked at her. He took one step toward the counter and placed both hands flat on it, leaning slightly forward. "I have been sitting in that chair for 45 minutes. I arrived at 7:30. She told me she came down at 6:30. You told her to wait for the cook at 10 o'clock. Sandra's mouth opened. "My mother," he stopped. He always called her that in moments of emotion. Not Nanny, not Mama Grace. Mother. "This woman has been in this house since 6:30 without water, with medication she needs water to take. Her knees gave out on the floor, and you went back to your room." "Sir, that's not—" Sandra's voice had taken on the note of a woman who is discovering that her strategy has failed completely and is switching rapidly to a new one. "The victim strategy. Sir, I have been working so hard in this house. It's very stressful managing everything, and sometimes there are misunderstandings." "Open the secondary fridge." "Silence." "Open it." Sandra did not move. Adrien straightened up. He walked to the utility room. He tried the secondary fridge. Locked. He held his hand out toward Sandra, palm up. She looked at his hand. She looked at his face. And she understood, in the way that people understand when the game is fully over, that there was nothing left to negotiate. She unclipped the key from her keychain and placed it in his hand. He unlocked the fridge. 6 full bottles of water, exactly where Patience had left them the previous evening. He closed the fridge door. He turned and looked at Sandra with the expression of a man who no longer needs more information. "Get your things," he said. "Sir." "Get your things, every item that you brought into this house, and be outside in 30 minutes. Your salary will be settled in full. You are done here." Sandra's composure cracked. Not in the way of genuine remorse. There was no genuine remorse. It cracked in the way of a person whose plan has collapsed and who is now going to try every remaining lever before accepting the result. "Sir, I have nowhere to go today. I need time to arrange." 30 minutes. "Sir, please, I have been working hard, whatever she said to you." 29 minutes. "Sir, you can't just—" "Sandra," he looked at her one final time, and what was in his face was not anger anymore. Anger would have been easier for her. Anger could be argued with, appealed to, softened. What was in his face was something worse than anger. It was the complete and settled understanding of who she was. "Whatever you planned to do in this house is over. Whatever you were working toward, the account, the document you read in her room, whatever you were building toward, it is over. My lawyers are going to go through every transaction, every movement, everything. You should pray that it is clean. Now leave my mother's house." The blood left Sandra's face. The account, the document. He had said them plainly, without drama, the way you state things that you already know and no longer need to argue about. She had truly believed that nobody knew about the document. Nobody knew about the account adjustments. Nobody knew. He knew. He had always been, underneath the suits and the meetings and the Forbes covers, the boy who calculated the mango savings at 9 years old. The boy who kept notebooks. The boy who noticed everything and said nothing until he had the full picture. He had noticed. He had pieced it together from the quality of Mama Grace's voice on late-night calls, from small inconsistencies in the household reports, from questions he had quietly asked Bello, the driver, who had not lied but had answered in a way that created more questions. He had not known everything, but he had known enough to come home. Sandra left the kitchen. She went upstairs. 32 minutes later, 2 minutes over, she came down with her 2 suitcases. She did not look at Mama Grace as she passed through. She did not say a word. She walked to the front door and out of it, and the gate opened for her, and she was gone. The house was quiet. Adrien stood in the kitchen for a moment after she left. He breathed. He put both hands on the counter and breathed. Then he went back to the kitchen table and sat beside Mama Grace. She was finished with the fruit. She had her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at him with an expression that he recognized from childhood, the expression she wore when she wanted to say something important and was deciding how to begin. "You didn't have to do it like that," she said. "Yes, I did." "Adrien." "Mama Grace." He turned in his chair to face her fully. "You were on the kitchen floor, begging for water, in your own house, while the woman I paid to care for you was upstairs in her room." She was quiet. "Nothing you say to me is going to make that all right," he said. "Nothing." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. And this was the question. This was the one he needed the answer to, not for anger's sake, but because he needed to understand. Because he needed to know that he had not failed her so completely, that she had stopped believing he would respond. Mama Grace looked at him for a long time. "Because you were in Tokyo," she said finally. He shook his head. "That's not a reason." "It is for me." She met his eyes. "Adrien, I have watched you build something extraordinary. I have watched you work. I know what it costs. I know what kind of concentration it requires. I was not going to be the thing that pulled you away from it." "Mama Grace." "You are my son," she said simply. "When your parents died, you were 7 years old and you had nobody. I chose to stay. I chose you. And I am glad I did. I am glad every day. But that choice came with something. It came with me caring more about your safety and your future than about my own comfort. That is not something I can switch off. That is what I am." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been here," he said. "I should have noticed earlier." "You noticed," she said. "You came." "Not soon enough." She put her hand over his. Her hand, small and warm and still slightly arthritic in the fingers, over his large one on the kitchen table. The same hand that had held his when he was 7. That had wiped his face and fixed his collar and clapped at his school play and pressed the scholarship letter against her chest. "You came," she repeated. "That is what I prayed for, and God sent you home." Adrien looked at her hand on his. He looked at the kitchen, his mother's kitchen, and the morning sunlight that was just beginning to come through the window. He heard the sound of Bello arriving at the gate outside. He heard a bird in the garden. He heard, somewhere in the house, the ordinary sounds of a home that was going to be all right. He turned his hand over and held hers, gently, careful of the arthritis. "I'm calling Patience right now," he said. "She's coming back at her normal time, 7:30. I'm staying home for 2 weeks. I'm not going anywhere." Mama Grace started to say something that sounded like a protest. "Don't," he said, and he almost smiled. "Don't tell me my business is important. You are more important. You have always been more important. I was just too busy and too far away to show it properly. That is going to change." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "2 weeks is a long time for a billionaire to stay in Lekki," she said. "Lucky for me it is a very nice house," he said. And she laughed. A real, full laugh, the first real laugh she had produced in months, and the sound of it in that kitchen in that morning was the most important thing that had happened in that house since the day it was built. The law firm was called Aluwason and Partners. It was one of the oldest and most respected legal practices in Lagos, and it had handled the documentation for the Lekki property from the beginning. Adrien called their senior partner, Barrister Falek Oluwaseun, that same Tuesday morning from the garden of Mama Grace's house while Mama Grace rested in her room. He spoke for 12 minutes. Barrister Oluwaseun listened, asked 3 precise questions, and said she would have 2 associates at the house by 2 o'clock that afternoon. They came at 1:55. 2 sharp-eyed young lawyers with laptops and a practiced professional quiet. They spent 3 hours going through the household accounts, which Adrien had full access to, cross-referencing every transaction against receipts, bills, and delivery records. They went through Sandra's hearing paperwork. They found what they were looking for without significant difficulty because Sandra, for all her planning, had been operating with the confidence of someone who believed she would never be audited. She had not been particularly careful. The amount redirected from the household account over 7 months was not enormous in the context of Adrien Akafer's wealth. It would not have registered as significant on any of his company's quarterly reports, but the principle was not the amount. The principle was the document in the brown envelope. The clause about persons found to have caused harm, discomfort, or financial disadvantage. The clause that said civil or criminal action was at the trustee's discretion. Adrien exercised that discretion. A formal complaint was filed with the Nigerian police force. A civil suit was also initiated. Sandra Ez was served with papers 4 days later at the address her employment records listed. The case would take time. Cases always took time, but the process had started. There would be a record. There would be consequences. Adrien did not do this out of vindictiveness. He did not do it from a desire to destroy. He did it because Mama Grace was 71 years old and she had sat on the kitchen floor of her own house and begged for a glass of water, and someone needed to understand, formally, legally, on record, that this was not acceptable, that there were no versions of the world in which this was acceptable. He did it because if he did not, the next 71-year-old woman in the next household, in the care of someone with the same plan, would have no deterrent, and deterrence required examples. He also did it because it was the right thing to do. And Adrien Akafer, beneath everything, was the son of Emmanuel and Chinwe Akafer, people who did the right thing not because it was convenient, but because they understood that the world holds its shape through people who insist on it. After the lawyers left, he sat in the garden for a while, the garden that had been neglected in recent months. He looked at the plants. He thought about Mama Grace's hands, arthritic now, but in their prime capable of making anything grow, and he thought about what needed to be done. He called Patience first. He told her what had happened, gently but honestly. She was not surprised. He could hear it in her voice, the relief of someone who had known something was wrong and had been afraid to be the one to say it. She had not been complicit. She had been frightened and had gone quiet. He understood the difference. He asked her to come back at 7:30 every morning and to stay as late as she wanted. He asked her if she was comfortable in the position. She said yes, more than comfortable, that she genuinely liked and respected Mama Grace and had hated what she had seen in recent months. He called Bello, similar conversation. Bello said, "Sir, I wanted to call you many times, but I was afraid." Adrien told him there was no more need for fear. He told Bello that if he ever noticed anything concerning in that house, he had Adrien's personal number and he was to call it, day or night. Then he spent time looking at the garden. He was not a gardener. He did not know plant names or growing conditions or the correct spacing for seeds, but he could see that the plants were alive, struggling but alive, and that with attention they would recover. He thought about finding a gardener, a real one, someone who would come twice a week and tend the garden properly and let Mama Grace supervise if she wanted to, which she would. He thought about a lot of things in that garden, about time, about distance, about the particular lie that busy people tell themselves, that success is the gift you give the people who love you, that the money and the houses and the provisions and the arranged staffing are the same thing as presents. He thought about every Tokyo meeting and London conference and a cross-site visit. He thought about the calls that had become shorter, the visits that had become rarer, the voice on the phone that had sounded fine, always fine. He thought about a 7-year-old boy on a living room floor and a 34-year-old woman who had chosen, without hesitation, to stay. He had not been wrong to build the business. The business had made everything possible. But somewhere in the building, he had started measuring his love for Mama Grace in things, in the size of the house, the quality of the refrigerator, the fullness of the pantry, and he had forgotten that what she had given him could not be measured in things at all. It was not measurable. It had no unit. It was simply the whole of a life, offered freely and completely. And he had repaid it with a refrigerator she was not allowed to open. He sat in the garden until the sun went down. Patience cooked that evening, a full, real, abundant meal. She served it at the dining table, not in a room, not on the floor, not in diminished portions. She set 2 places. She brought a vase with flowers from the struggling garden. Adrien and Mama Grace ate together. He told her about Tokyo. She told him about a television drama she had been following. He told her she should plant more tomatoes in the garden when it was tended. She told him he had no idea what went into growing tomatoes. He said that was true. She said she would teach him. He said he would learn. They ate everything on their plates. Adrien Okafor stayed for not 2 weeks but 3. His assistant, Fun Malola, managed his schedule with the particular combination of efficiency and tact that had made her invaluable. Meetings were moved to video calls. Decisions that could be delegated were delegated. Documents that needed signing were signed electronically. The Tokyo partnership, which was why he had gone in the first place, was concluded successfully by video conference on Thursday of the first week. He took the call from the garden of Mama Grace's house, his laptop open on the garden table, the slightly less struggling plants visible behind him, and Mama Grace inside making tea and pretending not to watch him through the kitchen window. He hired a new household manager, not a caregiver. He hired specifically not to replicate that arrangement. He hired instead a household manager named Mrs. Adiz Njoku, a quietly competent woman in her 50s with 20 years of experience managing large homes and an approach to her work that was practical and dignified. She came highly recommended by Barrister Oluwason, who knew her personally. Mrs. Njoku made clear from her first day that her role was to manage logistics, shopping, scheduling, maintenance, and that she had no intention of managing Mama Grace in any sense beyond ensuring she had everything she needed. Mama Grace, she said, was clearly more than capable of managing herself. Mama Grace liked her immediately. He also hired a physiotherapist, a young woman named Dr. Amaka Ez, no relation to Mama Grace, though Mama Grace found the shared name amusing, who came 3 times a week and worked on the arthritis in Mama Grace's knees and hands with a combination of exercise, heat therapy, and a new medication regime that the specialist Adrien had arranged with a geriatric doctor at a private clinic in Ikoyi had prescribed. Within 10 days, Mama Grace was walking more easily. Within 2 weeks, she was back in the garden. The garden was the thing Adrien watched most carefully in those 3 weeks, because the garden was the truest measure. The garden was where Mama Grace went when she was herself, when he could see her in the garden, kneeling carefully, hands in the soil, examining a plant, directing the gardener he had hired with the authority of someone who knows what they are doing. He knew she was coming back. She came back. She was not entirely who she had been before Sandra. The months had left something, a slight increased caution, a tendency to check whether she was permitted to do something before doing it, a flinching reflex when someone entered a room unexpectedly that she did not entirely control. These things would take time. Perhaps they would never fully leave, but she was coming back. He cooked for her once. He was not a cook. He had grown up eating her food and had never developed any confidence in a kitchen. But one afternoon Patience had a family matter and left early, and Adrien found himself in the kitchen looking at the contents of the refrigerator, now fully stocked, fully accessible, nothing locked, and he attempted to make egusi soup from a recipe he found on his phone. The result was not identical to Mama Grace's version, not even close, actually. The consistency was wrong and he had added too much crayfish. Mama Grace ate it without a single critical comment, which he knew was the most generous act of the entire 3 weeks. "It's good," she said. "Mama Grace, you are lying." "I am not lying, it is good. It just needs more time on the fire and less crayfish." "That is the same as saying it is not good." "Next time it will be better." He laughed, he ate his version, he agreed it was not good. In the evenings they watched television together. She had her dramas, Nigerian and Ghanaian productions that she had opinions about, strong opinions, which she expressed with the authority of someone who had been watching carefully, and had thoughts about character development and plotting and the quality of the dialogue. He was not always interested in the shows themselves, but he was always interested in her running commentary, which was funnier and sharper than any review he could have found online. He called his lawyers regularly for updates on the Sandra case. The process was moving. He was patient. He had been patient about more difficult things. On the last evening before he had to return to Lagos, he had a board meeting that could not be moved, a real one with international partners that required physical presence. He sat with Mama Grace in the garden after dinner. The air had cooled slightly. The plants were looking better. A neighbor's generator hummed steadily somewhere down the street. The Lagos night settled around them with its familiar urban texture. He looked at her. She was sitting comfortably in the garden chair he had bought her, padded, with the right support for her back, with her hands folded in her lap, and her face turned slightly toward the sky, the way she did when she was thinking or praying or both. "Mama Grace," he said. "Oh, I'm going to start coming home more." She turned to look at him. "The business can run," he said. "It has been running for years. I have built it to run. I have people who are good. Funmalola can manage 90% of my schedule without me physically present. I can work from here a great deal." He paused. "I should have been working from here a great deal more." She was quiet for a moment. "Adrien," she said, "you have not done anything wrong. I left you with someone who... You left me in a good house with good intentions. You couldn't have known. I should have checked more carefully." "You came when it mattered," she said. For the third time she said it, and it still sounded like the same sentence she had decided on, the one she was going to stand by. "You came when it mattered." He leaned forward in his chair. He put his elbows on his knees and looked at the garden. "You know what I thought about on the plane from Tokyo? I thought about the mango farmer." She blinked. "What mango farmer?" "When I was 9, I found the mango farmer in Abakpa. I calculated the savings, you remember." She looked at him with an expression that was so full it was hard to read. "Yes," she said softly, "I remember. I was so proud of myself. 300 naira a week. I thought I was a genius." She smiled. "You were. You were the one who actually went and found the man and bought from him. You made it real. You always made the things I calculated real." He looked at her. "That is what you did for my whole life. I came up with plans and ideas and calculations, and you were there making them real, making them grounded, keeping them connected to something important." He paused. "I forgot to tell you how much that mattered. I forgot for a long time, and then I forgot so long that I forgot that I had forgotten." Mama Grace pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. "You told me every time you called," she said. "You told me when you said, 'How are you?' and when you said, 'I'll call tomorrow,' and when you came home for Christmas and ate too much. You told me every time, Adrien. You just didn't use those exact words." He was quiet. "Some people," she said, "say the words and do nothing else. You built a house, you built a life, you tried." She looked at him steadily. "Now you are trying harder, that is what matters." He looked down. He looked at his hands, the hands that had held a pencil stub over notebooks in a rented room in Surulere, that had signed $100 million contracts, that had helped an old woman with arthritic knees up from a kitchen floor. "I want to come to church with you on Sunday," he said. She blinked. "You don't go to church." "I went when I was small." "You were dragged when you were small. There is a difference." He almost smiled. "I want to go if you'll have me." She considered this with great seriousness. Then she nodded. "Fine, but we arrive on time. I'm not sneaking in during the second song." "We'll leave early." "Good." They sat in the garden until the neighbor's generator stopped and the night got its own kind of quiet. Then Mama Grace said she was tired and Adrien walked her to her room and said good night the way he used to when he was 17 and still living at home. And the house in Enugu was full of her cooking smells, and she always was the last person awake. "Adrien," she said from the doorway. "Yes." "God kept you safe. In all those plains, all those countries. He kept you safe and brought you home." She paused. "Thank him tonight, not me, him." "Yes, Mama Grace." "Good night, my son." "Good night." 3 months after the Tuesday morning on Serenity Close, a journalist from a Lagos business magazine called Fun Malola and asked for a profile interview with Adrien Okafor. They wanted to do a piece on the expansion of Okafor Holdings into East Africa, a new logistics technology partnership that was generating significant industry interest. Standard business profile. The journalist was thorough and professional. She asked good questions. At the end of the interview, as they were wrapping up, she looked at her notes and said, "One last thing, Mr. Okafor. People always ask billionaires the same question. What drives you? What is your philosophy? What keeps you grounded? We have heard those answers many times. Can I ask you something different?" "Go ahead," he said. "You are 33 years old. You lost your parents when you were 7. You built this company essentially alone. You are on every major business list on this continent. What does home mean to you?" He was quiet for a moment. The journalist waited, pen ready. "Home is a woman named Grace Ez," he said. "She lives in Lekki. She is 71 years old. She is better at growing tomatoes than anyone I have ever met. She has opinions about Nigerian TV dramas that are more accurate than most professional reviews. She prays every evening, and she prays with the confidence of someone who has never in her life doubted that she is being heard." He paused. "She held me on the night my parents died when I was 7 years old. She did not leave. She chose to stay. She raised me with everything she had. She taught me not by saying it but by doing it every day in front of me that the measure of a person is not what they accumulate. It is what they choose to stay for." He looked at the journalist. "I am a billionaire because of spreadsheets and risk assessments and very long working hours. I am a person because of her. Those are two different things, and the second one is more important." The journalist wrote it down. She used it in the piece. It became the most shared paragraph of the article, passed around social media for weeks, quoted in 3 other publications. Mama Grace did not have social media. She did not see the article in its online form, but Mrs. Njoku printed it for her on a Tuesday morning, and she sat at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where Adrien had sat beside her 3 months earlier, and she read it once, and then again, and then she folded it carefully along its printed lines and put it in the drawer where she kept important things. She did not show it to anyone. She did not tell anyone she had it. But sometimes in the evenings after her prayers, she would open the drawer and look at it, not read it again, just look at the folded paper, and something in her face would become very peaceful. Adrien came home the following Sunday as he had promised. He came on time. They arrived at church on time, slightly early actually, which Mama Grace said was a miracle in itself. He sat beside her in the 3rd pew from the front, which was her regular pew, the one people knew was hers and left for her. He was tall enough that she looked small beside him, but she sat very upright and very steady. Several members of the congregation recognized him from photographs. They were respectful about it mostly, though one elderly usher did say, loudly enough that 3 nearby pews could hear, So this is the boy Grace raised. I can see it. He has her forehead. Mama Grace pretended not to hear. Adrien pretended not to be embarrassed. After church, she insisted on going to the market. She said she needed to buy a specific variety of pepper that only one market woman carried, and that she had not been able to access in recent months because her garden trips had been curtailed. Adrien went with her. He carried the bags. He was extremely bad at bargaining. He kept accepting the first price quoted, which caused Mama Grace visible distress, and she had to step in twice to negotiate on his behalf, which she did with a brisk confidence that made the market women laugh. On the drive home, bags of market produce in the boot of the car, Mama Grace said, "Adrien, how do you run a billion-dollar company if you cannot negotiate the price of pepper?" "Different scales," he said. "The principle is the same." "I will practice." "We will go back next week," she said. "You will negotiate everything yourself." "That is a threat." "It is education," she said, in a tone that was identical to every schoolteacher who had ever told him something difficult for his own good. "You need it." He was laughing. She was not quite, though the corners of her mouth were doing something. He came home the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that. He negotiated the pepper himself on the second market visit, successfully, she admitted, though she said his technique needed refinement. The visits did not happen with perfect regularity. His schedule remained what it was: dense and global and demanding. There were weeks when calls were brief and visits impossible. There were board meetings and investor presentations, and site visits to Nairobi and Accra, and a particularly complicated situation in London that occupied him completely for 10 days. But the visits happened. They were real. They were not performance. He did not bring cameras or make social media content about going home to his nanny. He simply went. He sat at the kitchen table. He ate whatever she had made. He watched Nigerian drama with running commentary. He tried to garden once and was told firmly to leave the tomatoes alone. He went to church when he could and listened to sermons that he found both challenging and useful in ways he had not expected. He went home. He went home because home was where he had decided to be, not physically all the time, not in the way that a child goes home, but in the way that a man chooses where his center is. And he had chosen. He had chosen clearly and deliberately, in a garden on a Tuesday evening in Lagos, sitting beside a woman who had pressed a scholarship letter against her chest and wept in a kitchen in Enugu 30 years earlier. His center was her. His center had always been her. He had just needed one Tuesday morning, one unannounced arrival, one glass of water to remember it. The case against Sandra S. was concluded 14 months later. It was not a dramatic conclusion. It did not happen in a packed courtroom with gasping observers. Nigerian civil and criminal proceedings do not typically work that way. It worked the way most legal accountability works: slowly, methodically, through documents and testimony and procedural steps that required patience above all else. Sandra was found guilty of financial misconduct, specifically the redirected household funds, and of causing emotional and physical harm to a vulnerable adult, the latter supported by the testimony of Patience the cook, Bello the driver, and a detailed statement from Mama Grace herself, which she gave in writing and which occupied 11 pages and was, by the assessment of Barrister Oluwaseun, one of the clearest and most devastating statements of evidence she had read in 23 years of practice. The consequences were a fine, a period of community service, and a criminal record that would make future employment in household management or caregiving effectively impossible. Sandra did not go to prison. The court, weighing the severity of the acts against the absence of physical violence, arrived at consequences that were significant without being custodial. Adrien accepted the verdict without public comment. He had not sought a harsher outcome. He had sought accountability, and accountability had arrived. What he was more interested in, what took more of his energy and thought in those 14 months, was the thing he had started working on while the legal process ran its course. He had started working on a foundation. He called it the Emmanuel and Chinwe Okafor Foundation, which was the same name he had put in the property trust provision years earlier. But where the trust provision was simply the destination for the Lecky house, the foundation was something much larger. It was a formal charitable organization with 3 programs. The first program was the one he announced publicly, and that received significant media attention: a scholarship fund for secondary school students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds in Enugu and Imo states, the places his parents had lived and worked, the places that had shaped them. The scholarship covered school fees, books, uniforms, and a small monthly stipend. Applications were open to students in their first year of secondary school. The selection was academic merit combined with financial need. The first cohort was 20 students. He intended to grow it to 200 within 5 years. The second program was quieter and received less media attention, which was deliberate. It was a training and accreditation program for household caregivers, specifically for people employed to care for elderly members of wealthy and middle-class households. The training covered practical caregiving, elder dignity, legal rights of elderly persons, and the legal responsibilities of caregivers. Completion of the program came with a certificate that employers could verify. Adrien funded a partnership with 2 Nigerian universities and a regulatory body to develop the curriculum. He had no illusion that it would eliminate all Sandra S's from all households in Lagos, but it would create a standard, a baseline, a thing that could be pointed to. The third program was the one that mattered most personally. It was a fund for women like Grace Ez, older women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, who had spent their lives in domestic service or in unpaid caregiving roles for families that were not their own, and who had reached old age without pension, without savings, without formal provision, without anyone having made the kind of legal arrangement for them that Adrien had made for Mama Grace. Women who were dependent on goodwill that was not guaranteed and on kindness that was not legally enforceable. The fund provided monthly stipends, medical coverage, and, where appropriate, housing assistance. He established it quietly. He did not make speeches about it. He told Mama Grace about it on a Sunday evening in the garden briefly, without flourish. She listened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your mother would have done the same thing." He looked at her. "Chinwe," she said, "she would have thought of it herself. She was that kind of woman." He was quiet. "I know," he said. They did not talk about it further. They had their dinner. They watched 40 minutes of a drama, a new one that Mama Grace was cautiously optimistic about, and then she went to bed and he sat in the garden for a while longer by himself, looking at the tomatoes she had replanted and that were now coming in very well, and he thought about his mother. His actual mother, Chinwe, who had taught mathematics and fed the neighborhood children, and died on a rainy road in November with eggs she had not asked for, going cold on a plate. He thought about her for a long time. He thought about his father, Emmanuel, who shook hands firmly and settled arguments and laughed loudly, and drove a little too fast on a flooded expressway because he had stayed too late eating one more pot of soup. He thought about what they had given him, not just the genes, not just the name, but the example. 27 months of example before the rain. 27 months of watching a man who did the right thing and a woman who fed the neighbors and left the door open. 27 months that he had no conscious memory of but that he believed, genuinely believed, were somewhere in him. In the part of him that kept notebooks. That found the mango farmer. That came home on a Tuesday without calling ahead. That established a foundation for women whose names he did not know. He thought about Mama Grace, who had taken what his parents had started and continued it, every day, for 33 years. He was the product of all 3 of them. He understood that clearly, sitting in that garden. He was Emmanuel's stubbornness and Chinwe's warmth and Grace Ez's patience, and all the notebooks and all the calculations and all the early mornings and all the losses and all the choices to stay when leaving was easier. He was what happened when people loved a child well. He was deeply, immeasurably grateful. There is a house in Lekki, Lagos, number 14 Serenity Close. The garden is thriving now. The tomatoes came in well this season. There is a new variety of pepper that Mama Grace planted along the back wall that is doing something unexpected and wonderful. There are 2 chairs in the garden, padded, with good back support. On Sunday evenings you will often find both of them occupied. A woman named Grace Ez lives in this house. She is 71 years old. She has a drawer in her bedroom that contains, among other things, a folded newspaper article and an old scholarship letter, and a small notebook that she has kept since 1992. The notebook contains, among other things, a 9-year-old boy's calculation of the weekly savings to be made by buying mangoes directly from a farmer in Abakpa. She has never thrown the notebook away. She never will. Somewhere in East Africa right now, a meeting is happening. A man in a navy blue suit is sitting across a table from a group of investors, talking about logistics technology and digital infrastructure, and the future of supply chains across the African continent. He is the kind of person who, when he speaks, people lean slightly forward. He has a calm that is not empty. It is calm that has been built out of everything he has lived. When the meeting ends, he will take out his phone. He will call a number that he knows by heart, a number he has called thousands of times. The phone will ring in a house in Lekki, in a room with a garden view, and a woman will pick it up and say his name the way she always says it, like it is a full sentence. Adrien, she will say. Mama Grace, he will say, how is the pepper coming in? And she will tell him. She will tell him about the pepper and the tomatoes and what Patience cooked for lunch and what Mrs. Njoku has organized for the week and what she thought about the last episode of the drama. She will talk with the ease and warmth of a woman who knows she is loved and has never doubted it, or who, at minimum, has stopped doubting it, which is close enough. And when she has finished telling him, she will say, as she always does, "Come home soon." And he will say, as he always does, "I'm coming." This is what love looks like. Not always perfect, not always present, not always on time, but always returning, always choosing when it comes to the decision to come back, always remembering, even from the other side of the world, even in the middle of a board meeting, even when the call was just yesterday, that the most important thing, the only truly irreplaceable thing, is the person waiting in the garden. The person who chose to stay. The person who held you in the dark and did not let go. This has been Tribal Tales Hub. If this story touched your heart, and we believe it did, please take 1 second right now and hit that like button. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Subscribe to Tribal Tales Hub if you have not already. We tell stories that matter. Stories about love and sacrifice and justice, and the people who hold families together when everything falls apart. Stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another story from us. And the comment section is yours. Tell us, who is the Grace Ez in your life? Who is the person who chose to stay for you? Tell us their name. Honor them right here in the comments. They deserve it. Share this video with someone who needs to remember what really matters today. This is Tribal Tales Hub. We will see you in the next story.